spent 3 hours preparing that Mother's Day lunch. 3 hours chopping vegetables, marinating the roast, and baking a lemon cake from scratch. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I thought it mattered. I thought family mattered. The dining room looked beautiful. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the crystal glasses I'd inherited from my mother. Fresh tulips brightened the center of the table, yellow because they were Joan's favorite, though she'd never once thanked me for remembering. "Mom, this looks great," Will said as they arrived, kissing my cheek briefly before taking his usual seat beside Joan. Joan didn't bother with a greeting. She just scanned the room with those critical eyes of hers and set her designer purse on my antique sideboard with a heavy thud. "It's warm in here, isn't it? Do you ever use the air conditioning, Bet?" I swallowed my first response. At 63, I'd learned which battles were worth fighting. "I'll adjust it after we eat," I said, forcing a smile. "The food's ready, and I don't want it getting cold." The tension was already building, like a storm front rolling in. For 5 years, I'd been helping them financially, paying their rent, covering their car payments, even funding most of their vacations. 5 years of watching Joan spend my money while treating me like an inconvenience. Will had been different. Before her. My sweet boy who called every Sunday, who cared about more than just what I could give him. Now he sat silently as Joan dominated every conversation, every decision. Lunch started pleasantly enough. We discussed the neighborhood, the weather, nothing consequential. Then Will mentioned they were thinking of moving to a bigger apartment. "That's a big step," I said carefully. "Those downtown units are expensive." Joan's eyes flashed. "We've found the perfect place. 3 bedrooms, that little office space Will needs, and the location is just divine." "Sounds lovely," I said, cutting into my roast. "But can you afford it?" The room went cold despite the warmth Joan had complained about earlier. "You know we're managing just fine," Joan said, voice sharpening. "Not all of us had the luxury of a full career before retirement." I set down my fork. "That wasn't a luxury, Joan. I worked 60-hour weeks after Robert died to put Will through college. I earned every penny of my retirement. And now you lord it over us," she said with a dismissive wave. "Every time we need a little help, we have to endure the lectures, the passive-aggressive comments." "That's not fair," I said quietly, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. The one that came whenever I realized how they saw me. Not as family, but as an ATM with inconvenient opinions. "Isn't it?" Joan laughed, that brittle sound that never held any real humor. "Will, tell your mother how you feel when she starts questioning our finances." Will shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, we just need a little help with the deposit. That's all." "After everything else?" I asked, unable to hold back anymore. "The rent I've been paying for years? The car payments? Joan's shopping trips?" "Oh my God," Joan interrupted, throwing her napkin onto the table. "This is exactly what I meant. You're not helping us. You're controlling us." "I've never controlled you," I said, my voice wavering. "I just want you both to be more responsible with money. Maybe if Joan got a job." "A job?" Joan's face flushed crimson. "I've been trying to launch my interior design business for years. But no, that's not good enough for the mighty Bet, is it? I'd never seen a single client, never heard about a single project. Just expensive courses and equipment that went nowhere." "I think we should discuss this another time," I said, attempting to salvage what was left of our Mother's Day lunch. "No. Let's discuss it now," Joan snapped. "Let's discuss how you hold your financial support over our heads like a weapon. How you can't stand that Will chose me instead of staying your obedient little boy forever. Joan, Will warned, finally speaking up. No, I'm done pretending, Joan continued, standing up now. Everyone tiptoes around her because she has the money, but I'm sick of it. You're nothing but a controlling old Megara who can't let go. Megara. Shrew. Hag. The room fell silent. Will stared at his plate. No defense of his mother. No objection to his wife's cruelty. I think you both should leave, I said, my voice unnaturally calm despite the earthquake happening inside me. Joan grabbed her purse with a triumphant smirk. Will followed her like a shadow, pausing only briefly at the door. Mom, she didn't mean— Yes, she did, I said. And you let her. That's what hurts the most. I closed the door behind them and returned to my beautiful table, set with such care for people who saw me only for what I could give them. The yellow tulips seemed to mock me now. That night, alone in my too quiet house, I made a decision. If they saw me as nothing but a bank account, then perhaps it was time to close that account for good. I was done being taken advantage of, done being the family Megara, done letting my own son and his wife drain not just my savings, but my dignity. Tomorrow, everything would change. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept hearing Joan's voice, that word, Megara, hanging in the air like poison. But worse than that was Will's silence. My son, who I'd raised alone after his father died when he was just 12, hadn't defended me. Not a word. Morning came with the harsh clarity that only a sleepless night can bring. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the quiet home I'd worked so hard to pay off. The same home where I'd bandaged Will's scraped knees, helped with science projects, and celebrated his college acceptance letter. The first call came at 9:17 a.m. Will. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, about yesterday. Joan was just stressed. You know how she gets. Call me back, okay? No apology, no acknowledgement of how deeply I'd been hurt. Just excuses for his wife's behavior, as always. I opened my laptop instead and logged into my banking portal. The numbers stared back at me, stark evidence of years of financial sacrifice. I'd been transferring $3,000 into their joint account every month since they got married 5 years ago. A temporary arrangement that had somehow become permanent. When Robert died, I'd been 42 with a 14-year-old son and a mortgage. I took on extra accounting clients, worked weekends, skipped vacations, all to ensure Will would have every opportunity. He never went without, even when I did. I scrolled through the transaction history, noticing patterns I'd been willfully ignoring. The day after my deposits, large sums withdrawn at high-end stores, Joan's business expenses, expensive restaurants, weekend getaways I was never invited to join. My phone buzzed again. Joan this time. Bet, we need to talk about the apartment. Deposit. It's due Friday, and we can't lose this place. It's perfect for us. No mention of yesterday's outburst. No apology for calling me a Megara at my own Mother's Day table. I closed my eyes, remembering how different things used to be. Will calling just to check in, bringing me soup when I had the flu, small gifts for no reason other than he'd seen, something he thought I'd like. Then Joan came along and everything changed. Suddenly my financial support wasn't generous assistance. It was expected, demanded, and somehow, still not enough. You're not helping us. You're controlling us, Joan had said. But who was really controlling whom? They lived in an apartment. They couldn't afford on their own, drove cars I made payments on, took vacations funded by my retirement savings. all while treating me like an inconvenience. The third call came from Will again. This time I answered. "Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday." "Are you?" I asked, my voice steady. "Of course I am. You know Joan, she speaks without thinking sometimes." "And what about you, Will? You didn't speak at all." Silence stretched between us. "We really need your help with this apartment deposit," he finally said, changing the subject. "It's $5,000, but it's an incredible deal for the location." I closed my eyes. "Will, do you realize how much money I've given you both over the years?" "Mom, not this again." "Over $180,000, I said, the number I'd calculated while sleepless last night. "That's how much I've transferred to you since your wedding. Not loans. Gifts." "We've been grateful," he said, his voice defensive. "Have you?" "Because yesterday didn't feel like gratitude. That was Joan being Joan. You know how she is." "Yes, I did know. And I'd allowed it for too long." "I need some time," I said. "I can't talk about money right now." "But the deposit," I said. "I need time, Will." After hanging up, I sat in my garden, the spring flowers I'd planted coming into bloom. I'd planned to travel after retirement, to see the Grand Canyon, visit Europe, maybe take that Alaskan cruise Robert and I had dreamed about. Instead, my savings had been slowly draining away, funding someone else's dreams while mine withered. By evening, I'd made my decision. I logged back into my accounts and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to their joint account. Then I transferred the bulk of my accessible savings, the money they'd come to see as theirs, into a certificate of deposit with a 6-month hold. Not hidden, not gone, but no longer available for last-minute emergencies that were really just wants disguised as needs. My hands trembled as I confirmed the transaction. For 5 years, I'd been an enabler, watching my son become increasingly dependent, increasingly entitled. I told myself I was helping, but was I? Or was I just making it easier for them to avoid responsibility? The confirmation email arrived with a soft ping. It was done. "If they're going to call me a Megara," I whispered to my empty house, "I might as well stop paying for the privilege." My phone began ringing again almost immediately, as if they could somehow sense what I'd just done. Will. Then Joan. Then Will again. I silenced the ringer and went to bed, exhausted but oddly peaceful. Tomorrow would bring a storm. I had no doubt. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own ship instead of being dragged along in someone else's wake. Maybe I'd book that Alaskan cruise after all. The first 48 hours of silence were almost peaceful. I puttered in my garden, reorganized my closet, and even called my travel agent to request some brochures for that Alaskan cruise. For 2 glorious days, I breathed without the weight of obligation pressing down on my chest. Then came the storm. "What knee? The hell, Mom?" Will's voice exploded through my phone on the 3rd morning. No greeting, no preamble. "The rent was due yesterday and the automatic transfer didn't happen. We're going to be charged late fees." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee before answering. "Good morning to you too, Will. Did you cancel the transfer? Is this some kind of punishment for what happened on Mother's Day?" "It's not a punishment," I said evenly. "It's a boundary." "A what?" He sounded genuinely confused, as if the concept was entirely foreign to him. Maybe it was. I'd never enforced any real boundaries with him before. "I'm no longer comfortable with our current financial arrangement," I said, using the calm, professional, tone I'd perfected during my 30 years as an accountant. I've decided to make some changes. Changes? Mom, we depend on that money. We've built our lives around it. And there it was, the stark truth I'd been avoiding for years. My son and his wife had built their lifestyle on my retirement savings, not on their own earnings. That's exactly the problem, Will. You're 34 years old. You shouldn't be depending on your mother's monthly checks to pay your rent. This is about Joan, isn't it? You've never liked her. I closed my eyes. This isn't about liking or not liking Joan. This is about the fact that I've given you both over $180,000 since your wedding, and instead of gratitude, I get called names at my own dinner table. She apologized for that. No, Will, she didn't. Neither of you did. Silence fell between us, heavy and accusatory. So that's it? He finally said. You're cutting us off completely because of one bad day? It wasn't one bad day. It was the day I finally saw clearly what's been happening for years. We have bills due, Mom. Real bills. What are we supposed to do? The question hung in the air, so obvious in its answer that I almost laughed. Get jobs. Live within your means. Be adults. You'll figure it out, I said instead. You're both intelligent people. He hung up without saying goodbye. The second call came an hour later. Joan this time, her voice syrupy sweet in a way that instantly put me on alert. Betty, darling, I think we got off on the wrong foot the other day. I was stressed about some design client issues, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. No genuine apology. No real acknowledgement of the hurt she'd caused. Just a transparent attempt to smooth things over and get the money flowing again. I appreciate you reaching out, Joan, I said neutrally. Will mentioned there. Was some issue with the monthly transfer? I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I've decided to make some changes to my financial commitments. A beat of silence, then her tone shifted, sugar turning to vinegar in an instant. Are you serious? You're really going to punish us over one stupid fight? This isn't punishment, Joan. This is me reevaluating my choices. You vindictive old woman, she hissed, all pretense abandoned. Will was right. You've never accepted me, never thought I was good enough for your precious son. This isn't about you, Joan. It's about the way you both treat me. We treat you like family. No, I said quietly. You treat me like an ATM. She hung up with a stream of profanities that would have made a sailor blush. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from family members I rarely heard from. Will's cousins, my sister-in-law, even Robert's brother from Arizona. All of them concerned, all of them asking variations of the same question. Why was I abandoning my son when he needed me? The family grapevine had been busy, and Joan was clearly the one tending the vines. Ruth called as I was making dinner. My oldest friend, the only person besides Robert who had ever truly seen me. I just got the strangest call from your sister-in-law, she said without preamble. Something about you having a breakdown and cutting off Will? I laughed despite everything. That didn't take long. What's really going on, Bet? I told her. Everything. The years of financial support, the Mother's Day disaster, my decision to stop enabling their dependency. Good for you, Ruth said when I finished. It's about damn time. I've been watching that boy and his wife drain you dry for years. The family doesn't see it that way. According to Joan, I'm having some kind of vengeful breakdown. Of course that's what she's saying. She just lost her meal ticket. Ruth's bluntness made me wince, but she wasn't wrong. Will thinks I'm punishing him, I said quietly. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? A little bit? Ruth asked gently. He sat there while his wife called you names. He deserves to feel some consequences for that. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps part of me did want Will to understand how deeply he'd hurt me with his silence, his tacit acceptance of Joan's behavior. But it was more than that. This was about reclaiming my life, my future, my dignity. This was about finally saying, enough. The next morning, I drove to the mall, something I rarely did anymore, finding it too crowded and chaotic. But I needed to see something with my own eyes. I parked near the high-end department store and waited. At precisely 10:30 a.m., Joan's red BMW pulled into the lot. She stepped out wearing designer sunglasses and carrying the expensive purse she'd bought on sale last month. The one Will had casually mentioned cost over $800. I watched as she met two other women, all of them laughing as they headed into the store. So much for being desperate about bills. As I drove home, my resolve strengthened. If they were truly in financial distress, it wasn't because I'd closed my wallet. It was because theirs had never been open in the first place. 2 weeks passed in a blur of missed calls, accusatory text messages, and increasingly hostile voicemails. According to Will, I was destroying their lives. According to Joan, I was a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see others happy. According to various extended family members who suddenly had opinions about my relationship with my son, I was having some kind of mental breakdown. I deleted most messages without listening to them fully. There was only so much vitriol I could stomach in a day. Then came the text that made my heart sink. Family dinner at our place tonight, 7 p.m. Everyone will be there. We need to talk about what's going on with you. Will, everyone. That meant my brother Tom and his wife Susan. Probably Robert's sister Diane, who had always treated Will like her own son. Maybe even Aunt Martha, who at 87 rarely left her assisted living facility, but never missed an opportunity to meddle in family matters, a family intervention, with me as the target. My first instinct was to refuse. I didn't owe them an explanation, and I certainly didn't need to subject myself to a coordinated attack. But then I remembered something my mother used to say. Never run from a fight you know you can win. I texted back a single word. Fine. The drive to Will and Joan's apartment felt longer than usual. They lived in a trendy area of the city, in a building with amenities they rarely used but loved to mention. A rooftop pool, a concierge service, a fitness center with personal trainers. Available. All funded by my monthly transfers. I parked beside Tom's Lexus and took a deep breath. Then I smoothed my hair, reapplied my lipstick, and headed inside. The apartment was immaculate as always, with Joan's designer touches everywhere. Pillows that cost more than my first car, artwork she claimed were investments, furniture that looked beautiful but was oddly uncomfortable. Will opened the door wearing an expression that mingled relief and apprehension. "Mom," he said, the word awkward between us now. "Thanks for coming." Beyond him, I could see the others already gathered. Tom and Susan on the expensive sectional sofa. Diane perched on an accent chair, her face pinched with concern. Aunt Martha surprisingly present, her walker parked beside a dining chair that had been positioned specially for her. And at the center of it all, Joan, playing perfect hostess, offering wine and making small talk as if this were a normal family. Gathering and not an ambush. "Would you like a glass of wine, Bet?" she asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We have that Cabernet you like." The Cabernet I'd brought them as a housewarming gift 3 years ago, probably. "No, thank you," I said. I'd like to know why I've been summoned here. Tom cleared his throat. Summoned is a bit dramatic, Bet. We're worried about you. About me? Or about the money I'm no longer providing to Will and Joan? The room shifted uncomfortably. Joan's smile tightened to a thin line. It's not about money, Will said, though his eyes said otherwise. It's about family. Family, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. Is that what we call it when a son sits in silence while his wife insults his mother? When he expects that same mother to fund his lifestyle without question or gratitude? Bete, Diane interjected. Will tells us you've been under a lot of stress lately. We understand retirement can be a difficult adjustment. I've been retired for 3 years, Diane. I was adjusting just fine until I realized I was being taken advantage of. No one's taking advantage of you, Joan said, her voice rising slightly. We've always been grateful for your help. Grateful? I laughed. Is that what you call it when you referred to me as a controlling old Megara at my Mother's Day table? Silence fell over the room. Apparently, Joan had left that detail out of her version of events. Joan was just upset, Will began. And you said nothing, I cut in. Nothing, Will. Your wife insulted your mother in the cruelest way possible, and you sat there in silence. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should all take a step back. No, I said firmly. I'm tired of stepping back. I've spent the last 5 years watching my retirement savings dwindle while these two live a lifestyle they can't afford. I've listened to Joan complain about my interference while cashing my checks. I've watched my son turn into someone who values money over respect. That's not fair, Will protested. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, Will? Not to ask for money, not to complain about a bill, just to check on your mother? His silence was answer enough. You've all been summoned here under false pretenses, I continued, looking around the room. There's nothing wrong with me. I simply decided to stop being an ATM and start being a parent again. A real parent doesn't enable dependence. A real parent expects basic respect. Aunt Martha, who had been unusually quiet until now, thumped her cane on the floor. She's right, she said, her voice cracking with age but firm with conviction. You all called me here talking about how Bet's lost her mind, but all I'm hearing is that she finally found her backbone. Joan's face flushed crimson. With all due respect, Mrs. Henderson, you don't know the whole story. I know enough, Martha retorted. I know Robert left Bet well provided for, and instead of enjoying her golden years, she's been bankrolling your lifestyle. It wasn't like that, Will insisted. Then what was it like? I asked. Explain it to me, Will. Explain how it's normal for a grown man and his wife to depend on his mother's monthly checks to pay rent on an apartment they can't afford. Explain how it's acceptable for that wife to insult that mother after years of financial support. The room fell silent again. In that silence, I saw the truth dawn on Tom's face, on Diane's, even on Susan's. They had come prepared to deal with a difficult, irrational old woman. Instead, they found themselves facing an uncomfortable reality about Will and Joan. Maybe, Susan said slowly, we should give Bet and Will some privacy to discuss this. Joan immediately objected. There's nothing to discuss privately. This affects both of us. And there it was, the mask slipping, revealing the fear beneath. Joan wasn't worried about family harmony. She was worried about losing her financial safety net. No, I said, standing up. We don't need privacy. What we needed was honesty, and now we have it. I won't be reinstating the monthly transfers. won't be funding the deposit on a new, larger apartment. I won't be treated with disrespect by people who claim to love me but only value what I can give them. Will's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw a flash of my little boy, the one who used to look at me like I hung the moon, the one who cried when he accidentally broke my favorite vase and then saved his allowance for months to replace it. What had happened to that boy? "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, we need you. Not I love you. Not I'm sorry. Just, we need you." And we both knew what kind of need he meant. "No, Will," I said softly. "What you need is to grow up. What you need is to stop expecting others to fund your choices. What you need is to remember the values I raised you with: honesty, hard work, respect." I picked up my purse and headed for the door, pausing only briefly to look back at the assembled family members. "I'm sorry you were all brought here under false pretenses. Next time, I hope it's for a real celebration, not an attempt to manipulate an old woman into opening her wallet again." As I closed the door behind me, I heard Joan's voice rising in anger, and for the first time in years, I didn't worry about smoothing things over. This wasn't my mess to fix. It was time they learned to clean up after themselves. After the disastrous intervention, I expected radio silence from Will and Joan. Instead, the calls and texts stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. No more accusations, no more pleas for help, no more thinly veiled threats about me never seeing future grandchildren. Just nothing. For 3 weeks, I basked in the quiet. I booked that Alaskan cruise for September, a 14-day journey through icy waters and breathtaking landscapes. I joined a gardening club that met on Saturdays at the community center. I even had dinner with Peter, the widower who'd moved in down the street last year. Nothing romantic, just pleasant conversation with someone who understood the strange territory of life after losing a spouse. Ruth called regularly, always starting with the same question. "Have you heard from them?" "Not a word," I'd answer, trying to ignore the twinge in my heart. I missed my son, not the entitled adult he'd become, but the thoughtful boy he'd once been. The silence was both a relief and a wound. "They're probably regrouping," Ruth said during our weekly lunch. "Joan's not the type to surrender easily," I sighed, poking at my salad. "Maybe they're finally growing up. Maybe they've realized they can manage without my checkbook." Ruth gave me a look that said she doubted it. She was right to be skeptical. The doorbell rang at exactly midnight. I'd been asleep for over an hour, and the harsh chime startled me from a deep dream. For a moment, I lay disoriented in the darkness, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then it came again, more insistent this time. I pulled on my robe and made my way downstairs, heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw a distorted figure standing on my porch, shoulders hunched, head bowed. It took me a moment to recognize Joan without her usual perfect posture and immaculate appearance. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Joan looked like a stranger. Her typically styled hair hung limply around her face. Her mascara was smudged, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She wore wrinkled clothes that looked like they'd been slept in. "Bet," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Whatever this was, I didn't want the neighbors witnessing it. Joan walked directly to my living room and sank onto the couch, her movements lacking their usual grace. Up close, she looked even worse, pale, exhausted, defeated. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, not knowing what else to say. She shook her head. Will doesn't know I'm here. I sat down across from her, pulling my robe tighter around me. Why are you here, Joan? I need your help, she whispered, not meeting my eyes. Financial help? Yes. At least she was being direct this time. I've made my position clear. Will's going to leave me. That stopped me cold. Whatever I'd been expecting, it wasn't this. He said he can't take it anymore, Joan continued, her voice cracking. The stress, the debt, the lies. What lies, Joan? She finally looked up, her expression a mix of shame and defiance. I have a problem. What kind of problem? Shopping, spending. She gestured vaguely. The therapist calls it a compulsive behavior. Therapist. That was new. How long have you been seeing a therapist? Since you cut us off, Will insisted. She laughed bitterly. He said I needed to figure out why I can't stop spending money we don't have. I leaned back, processing this new information. How bad is it, Joan? Bad. Really bad. Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled envelope. These are just the credit card statements. I opened the envelope and felt the blood drain from my face. 6 credit cards, all maxed out. The total was staggering, over $87,000 in debt. Will doesn't know the full amount, Joan said quietly. I've been hiding statements, intercepting mail, telling him things are under control. But they're not. She shook her head. I couldn't stop. Every time I felt stressed or anxious or not good enough, buying something new made me feel better. Just for a little while. And then I felt worse. So I bought something else. Joan wiped at her eyes. It's been like this since I was a teenager. My parents always bailed me out. Then I met Will, and you were always there with another check, another transfer. We enabled you, I said softly. Joan nodded. When you stopped the money, everything fell apart. I couldn't hide it anymore. The collection calls started. A credit card company froze one of our accounts. Will started asking questions I couldn't answer. I looked at the woman sitting across from me, not the polished, confident Joan who had called me a Megara, but someone broken and desperate. For the first time, I felt something close to sympathy for her. Why come to me? I asked. After everything. That's happened? Because I have nowhere else to go, Joan said simply. My parents are retired in Florida. They don't have this kind of money. My friends. She trailed off. They're not really friends. They like my lifestyle. The shopping trips, the lunches. They won't help now. And what do you expect me to do? I don't know, she admitted. Pay off the debt? Save my marriage? Tell me how to fix this? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my darkened street. It would be so easy to write a check, to smooth over the problems as I'd done for years. But would that actually help Joan? Would it help Will? If I paid off these debts, I said slowly, what would change? Would you stop the compulsive spending? Would Will suddenly start standing up for himself? Would either of you learn anything? Joan didn't answer, which was answer enough. You called me a Megara because I suggested you be more responsible with money, I continued. You resented my interference while happily taking my support. You turned my son against me when I finally said enough. I know, Joan whispered. I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you just sorry that the consequences have finally caught up with you? Her silence spoke volumes. I turned back to face her. I won't give you money, Joan. Her face crumpled. Then Will is going to leave me. Maybe he should, I said, not unkindly. Maybe you both need to face reality without a safety net. You hate me that much? Joan asked, a flash of her old fire returning. I don't hate you at all, I replied honestly. But I've learned something important these last few weeks. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop rescuing someone from their own choices. Joan stared at me, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I saw something like understanding in her eyes. Then, the moment passed, and she stood up, gathering her purse. You'll regret this, she said, but the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. When Will and I are divorced, when your grandchildren are growing up in a broken home, you'll remember this night. I opened the front door for her. What I'll remember, Joan, is that I finally stopped being an enabler and started being a mother. She stepped onto the porch, then turned back one last time. I really am sorry for what I called you, for how I treated you. She swallowed hard. I just don't know how to live any other way. You can learn, I said, but not if everyone keeps making it easy for you not to. I watched as she walked to her car. Not the red BMW I noticed, but an older sedan I didn't recognize. As her taillights disappeared down the street, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. For the first time, I'd seen the real Joan, not the confident, polished woman who had swept my son off his feet, but the broken person beneath the facade. And in her brokenness, I recognized a truth I'd been avoiding. In my attempts to help, I'd been part of the problem all along. Chapter 6. The Liberation. The morning of my Alaskan cruise departure dawned bright and clear. I stood in my bedroom, surrounded by carefully packed suitcases, and took a deep breath. 2 months had passed since Joan's midnight visit. 2 months of silence from both her and Will. 2 months of rebuilding my life without the weight of their expectations draining my energy and my bank account. Are you sure you don't want me to drive you to the port? Ruth asked over the phone. It's no trouble. The car service is already booked, I replied, checking my watch. Besides, you'd just cry and make me feel guilty for leaving you behind for 2 weeks. Ruth laughed. You know me too well. Her voice softened. Have you heard anything? She didn't need to specify from whom. Not a word. Their loss, Ruth said firmly. You're going to have an amazing time. After we hung up, I did one final sweep of the house. Plants watered, mail on hold, lights on timers, everything perfect. As I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, the doorbell rang. Probably the driver, early. I opened the door with a welcoming smile that froze on my face. Will stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, looking older than his 34 years. Mom, he said quietly. Will? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. I wasn't expecting you. He glanced at my luggage. You're going somewhere? Alaska. A cruise. I leave this morning. He nodded, processing this information. Can I come in? Just for a minute? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Will entered cautiously, as if he wasn't sure of his welcome in the home where he'd grown up. I would have called first, he said, but I was afraid you wouldn't want to see me. I would have answered, I said simply. He looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on family photos I'd recently rearranged. More of Robert and me in the early years, fewer of Will and Joan. You've made some changes, he observed. Yes, I agreed. I have. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, Will took a deep breath. Joan and I separated, he said. A month ago. Despite Joan's midnight warnings, the news still shocked me. I'm sorry, I said automatically. Will shook his head. Don't be. It was a long time coming. I just couldn't see it. What happened? He sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. The debt happened. The lies happened. I found out she'd been hiding credit card statements for years. We're over $100,000 in debt. I kept my face neutral, though the figure was even higher than what Joan had shown me. That's a lot of money. It's worse than that, Will continued. She took out a second mortgage on the apartment without telling me. Used my signature. Forged it. He laughed bitterly. The bank's investigating her for fraud. I sat down across from him, processing this new information. Is that why you're here? Do you need a lawyer? Will looked stricken. No, Mom. I'm not here for money. I'm here to apologize. Apologize? For everything. He leaned forward, eyes intense. For letting Joan treat you the way she did. For expecting you to finance our lifestyle. For not being the son you raised me to be. I didn't speak, afraid that if I did, this moment would shatter like glass. When you cut us off, I was angry, Will continued. I thought you were being petty, punishing us for one bad day. I didn't see how entitled I'd become, how used to taking and taking without giving anything back. What changed? I asked quietly. Everything. Will ran a hand through his hair. We had to move out of the apartment. Couldn't afford it. I took a second job. Started looking at our actual finances for the first time in years. He shook his head. I was shocked by what I saw. The waste, the irresponsibility, my irresponsibility. It wasn't all your fault, I said softly. Enough of it was. Will met my gaze directly. You were right, Mom, about all of it. I let myself become dependent. I let Joan disrespect you because it was easier than standing up to her. I chose the path of least resistance, and it cost me my relationship with you. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. It's not too late to fix that. That's why I'm here. Will reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. This isn't much, but it's a start. I opened it to find a check for $200. It's not even a fraction of what I owe you, Will said quickly. But I'm going to pay you back, Mom. All of it. It might take years, but I'm going to make this right. I looked at the check, then at my son. Really looked at him. Gone was the entitled young man who expected the world to pave his way. In his place sat someone humbled, someone growing. Keep it, I said, holding the check out to him. Use it to get back on your feet. Mom, no, I want to. I know you do. And that means more to me than the money ever could. I placed the check on the coffee table between us. This isn't about money, Will. It never was. It was about respect, about boundaries, about you becoming the man I raised you to be. Will's eyes filled with tears. I've missed you, he said, his voice breaking. So much. I've missed you too, I admitted. Not the you who expected me to fund your lifestyle. The real you. He nodded, understanding. The real me got lost somewhere along the way. I'm trying to find him again. My phone buzzed. The car service, waiting outside. I have to go, I said. Reluctantly. My cruise. Will stood up quickly. Of course. I didn't mean to keep you. He hesitated. When you get back, maybe we could have dinner? Just the two of us? I'd like that. I said, surprised by how much I meant it. He helped me with my luggage, carrying it to the waiting car just like he used to do when he was younger. As the driver stowed my bags in the trunk, Will turned to me. I have one more thing to tell you, he said. I enrolled in financial counseling, and I'm seeing a therapist. I don't want to repeat the same patterns again. Pride washed over me. Not the possessive pride I'd once felt in his accomplishments, but a deeper, purer pride in his growth. That takes courage, I said. I learned it from you. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. Have an amazing trip, Mom. Take lots of pictures. I will, I promised. As the car pulled away, I watched Will standing in my driveway, waving. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether we could rebuild the relationship that had been so damaged. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. That night, as the cruise ship pulled away from the harbor, I stood on the deck and watched the city lights recede into the distance. The salty air filled my lungs, and a sense of profound peace settled over me. I'd spent so many years being everyone else's support system that I'd forgotten how to exist for myself. I'd given and given until I was hollow, thinking that was what love meant. But real love had boundaries. Real love expected respect. Real love didn't drain you dry. 6 months ago, being called a Megara at my own Mother's Day table had felt like the ultimate betrayal. Now I recognized it as the moment that set me free, the moment I stopped accepting crumbs and started demanding the feast I deserved. The ship's horn sounded, long and low, as we moved into open water. Above me, stars emerged in the darkening sky, countless pinpricks of light. Somewhere ahead lay glaciers and fjords, wildlife and adventure, new friends and experiences I'd denied myself for too long. I leaned against the railing, feeling lighter than I had in years. The money I'd put aside, the money I'd finally stopped giving away, was now funding the dreams I'd postponed. The energy I'd spent managing Will and Joan's crises was now my own again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Ruth. Bon voyage. Remember, you don't owe anyone your joy. I smiled, typing back. Lesson learned. Finally. As the shoreline disappeared completely, I made myself a silent promise. I would never again mistake sacrifice for love or boundaries for cruelty. I would never again allow anyone to make me feel guilty for valuing myself. And if that made me a Megara in someone else's story, so be it. In my own story, I was finally gloriously free.